This week on Houston Newsmakers, the mayor's race is headed to a runoff. Both candidates are here. State Representative Sylvester Turner received 31% of the votes and led the way in the field of 13 vying for the city of Houston top job. What does he need to do to win that job outright in December? Bill King, the former mayor of Kemah, received 25% of the vote and now has his chance to convince at least another 25% that he's the man for the job. We'll ask how he plans to get that done. And what's wrong with the almost $2 billion HISD bond? It's more than $200 million short. Superintendent Dr. Terry Greer is here.
From KPRC Channel 2, this is Houston Newsmakers with Cambrell Marshall.
And it was a busy night on Tuesday. After Election Day polls had closed, 13 candidates were running for mayor, but 2 were on top from the release of the early votes, and it stayed that way until the end. Sylvester Turner was the top vote getter on Tuesday with 31% of the vote. Bill King received 25% of the vote, joins him in the runoff. They both are here this morning. Thank you for coming in. Congratulations to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
You're starting to get your mindset on what you have to do to the general election, to the runoff to now win?
We are now in round 2 and looking forward to it. 6 weeks to go.
What's the difference in how you're going to run your races in a runoff as opposed to what you did the first time around?
I don't think there's going to be a lot of difference. Frankly, we just don't have quite as much competition for our message. So I think both of us, I suspect, will stay with pretty much the same message, and we'll have more time to develop it with the voters.
And what's that message? What's going to be the difference? Now you have 2 people who are going to be choosing from. What do you say to distinguish yourself from Bill and vice versa?
Well, I think the critical component is that we'll have more time to discuss these issues that are important. When we're talking about infrastructure, rebuilding streets, 24-hour road maintenance repair program is something that I've been advocating, similar to what the county has. When we're talking about public safety, 5,300 police officers, fewer than what we had 10 years ago. 1,900 of them are eligible to retire. We'll talk about that. And for me, financial management is critically important. And then I add in the other 2 elements. You can't have a growing, vibrant city without having strong, healthy schools. And we certainly need to do something to address the income inequality that exists in the city.
How different is your message? Similar, different, very distinctively different?
I think on infrastructure and public safety, we're going to be saying a lot of similar things. I think on the finances, there's a pretty sharp difference between the 2 of us. I think that on public education, income inequality, while those are certainly important issues, I think they're not something that the city's primarily responsible for dealing with.
How are you going to distinguish yourself in that message? So the voters will say, well, okay, you're the guy as opposed to Sylvester.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest difference is going to be the finances, and we've got a big difference on the property tax cap. Sylvester wants to modify it. I don't think we ought to do that. You know, that property tax cap says that the city council and mayor cannot raise your property taxes by more than 4.5% a year without asking the voters' approval. And I don't think we need to modify that. I don't think we need to do away with it. I think we have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. And that's something I'm not in favor of.
Is he right?
Well, no. That'd be very simple. I think, number one, I think it's very difficult to talk about a growing city without talking about the income inequality. 24% of the people in the city are working poor. You can't have a city of have and have not, so that's important. Education. You cannot leave education out of this discussion. Education is critically important. You can't have schools going in one direction and the city going on another. We do have major differences on financing. Bill advocates more of debt financing, more debt. Quite frankly, the city can't afford more debt. I think we need reliable, adequate funding sources. I think that's critically important. We differ even on police. I believe we need 540 additional police over a 5-year period. Bill has not advocated adding any police. So I think we need to deal with that. But if you engage in debt financing, as Bill subscribes to, number one, you certainly would be putting the city in a very precarious state. The city can't afford any more debt, and if you put the revenue cap on top of that, capital improvement programs are going to be stymied. And invariably, I think if you go in Bill's direction, the city will have to have tax increases in order to cover the increased debt that he's willing to put the city in. You cannot balance the books of the city by pulling out your credit card and adding more things to it.
And your response to that?
No, look, I promise you the next mayor is going to take out some bonds to do long-term infrastructure, regardless of which one of us it is. That's the only way to get caught up on this infrastructure, and we absolutely can afford to do it. Look, in the last budget that was just approved here 2 months ago, the city added 775 new positions to the city, about $50 or $60 million. That would have covered $1 billion worth of road and drainage bonds to get some work done. This is not a question that we don't have the money, it's how we're spending it. That's the issue.
Well, we're going to differ on that. The reality is, even if you issue more bonds, you have to pay for the debt service. I have worked on 6 state budgets, one of the 5 conferees sitting at the table, $200 billion budgets. When the state faced a $10 billion shortfall, I was at the table. When the state faced a $27 billion shortfall, I was at the table. If you increase your debt, you increase your debt service. And if you don't have any more revenue coming in, then you're going to have to find the revenue to pay for the debt. And invariably, that will cause a tax increase.
Let me just jump in because I want to make sure we're clear about this. We do have the extra revenue. In the last 6 years, our revenue is up $1 billion. Property tax are up 24%, sales tax 37%, water and sewer rates 42%, licensing and permitting fees 100%. We just decided to spend that money some way other than working on our infrastructure. That's the key.
Well, this is going to be an opportunity for us to go ahead and get more of this as we get into the campaign. I want to move along a little bit because there were so many other people running in this race. How do you go after the folks who voted for the Adrian Garcias, the Costellos, the Bells? What's the strategy now going forward to get those voters who came out for those candidates?
Well, I mean, there were many different individuals the first time around, but you know, people are interested in what's in the best interest of the city. And for me, the critical question that I will be asking to people and asking of myself, what's in the best interest of the city? Not what's in the best interest of a particular interest group, not what will gain a partisan advantage, but what is in the best interest of the city. There are no Republican or Democratic potholes. There's no Republican or Democratic budget. There's no Republican or Democratic when it comes to police officers. And we're all in this city. This is the most diverse city in the country. And I think what's important is that people want to believe is that they are included in the decision-making process and that you will work to form a consensus and not try to do something to advance any particular group. I think if you do that, you can appeal to people across the board.
Can you get Adrian Garcia's voters and Stephen Costello's voters?
Yeah, no, actually, I think Sylvester and I agree on this. This is going to be a campaign of ideas. And obviously, there's some people that supported all of these folks that have different ideas about the budget. And we're going to have some differences on those. I think people will make a judgment which one of us is best able to manage it. But I think you'll see voters from all those camps going both directions.
Did you learn something from each other during this campaign? Because you were with each other a lot. You spent more time with each other than you probably spend at home.
In fact, you don't need both of us here today. I mean, you could ask, you could ask the question, and either one of us could give you, give each other's answer.
Well, and we've known each other for 30 years as well, too. So.
Have you taken anything from the campaign up to this point that each other has said that you say, okay, I like that idea?
Actually, I'll tell you something. You know, I think Sylvester made a great point about if you change the retirement plan for the existing police especially, you've got a good chance of losing a bunch of police officers. I think that is an absolute valid point that he made a long time in the campaign, and it helped me sort of formulate my idea that we need to change it only for new employees.
Mm-hmm. And I think on my end, you know, Bill advocated very early about eliminating the crime lab, that we don't need 3 crime labs, one for the city, one for the county, one for the state, and I happen to agree with that.
One of the things that was very prominent in this election was the Equal Rights Ordinance, and of course it was credited with bringing out a big turnout. Can that turnout be duplicated? Well, we're going to talk about that in a bit because in our next segment, how much of an impact will that be on the runoff, the impacts of the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance? It seems to have been done. It's done, but is it? We'll talk about that next. Welcome back to Houston Newsmakers, where I'm joined by State Representative Sylvester Turner Bill King, who are headed for a runoff on December 12th for the job of mayor of Houston. One of the big issues last week was the vote on the Equal Rights Ordinance. It was a big defeat for Mayor Parker and those pushing to get this ordinance passed. There was never an intent to have it before voters. The state Supreme Court kind of made that happen, and now it's been defeated, but it got a lot of people to come out in that runoff. Representative Turner, you were solidly in favor of that ordinance. Now it has not happened. What should be done going forward?
Well, I mean, this is a diverse city. This is the most diverse city in the country. But at the same time, this is not a one-issue city. People are very much interested in infrastructure to keep up with the growing demands. People want a safer city. They want stronger schools. They want better economic opportunities. And all of those issues need to be addressed. People are concerned about parks and green space. And at the same time, they want to make sure that in a diverse city that we don't discriminate. I don't think the vote that took place was saying yes to discrimination. I don't think that was the message, and I think we need to be very careful about that. We are a great city, but I don't think in that vote people were saying, yes, you can discriminate against people based on their race or their religion or their faith or their age.
Under your mayorship, does it come back up? With you as mayor, does an equal rights ordinance of any sort come back up?
I think you always, number one, you respect the will of the voters, and I certainly will respect the will of the voters. But at the same time, I think you're always working to make sure that in a very diverse city, everyone has an opportunity to have their voices heard, and that we do not discriminate. With or without this ordinance, I mean, discrimination was taking place, okay? And the question is, how can we always work to improve the environment in which everyone is given an opportunity to succeed, that they have opportunity in housing and contracting and employment, being able to go to clubs without being discriminated. I think those are those are things that are important.
Bill?
Yeah, so I actually think Sylvester and I are pretty close on this issue. I think the people have spoken. You know, I think one thing that was interesting to me is that during the 9 months that we had this ordinance, there were only 11 complaints, and 5 of those were dismissed for lack of evidence. And the reason there were only 11 complaints is this is not a city in which there is widespread discrimination. This is one of the most open, welcoming cities in the world. And, you know, what I found frustrating about this whole discussion was, you know, in the next week, if averages hold, there'll be 22 women raped, twice as many complaints as there was under the Equal Rights Ordinance in the next week. And we only solved 25% of those rape cases last year. 600 unsolved rape, 20,000 unsolved burglaries, 10,000 unsolved robberies last year. These are the issues that we need to be focusing on.
Going forward, a lot of the people who came out to vote came out because of that ordinance. It's going to be a different landscape coming up. How does that make the landscape different? Because you don't have.
But the reality is, though, Cambrell, we are all Houstonians. I think, you know, this is not a one-issue town. I think this is a very diverse city. I think it's important, I will say, that this has to always be a welcoming city. And I'm committed to that. And this has to be a city that does not discriminate, that we don't discriminate against people based on their group affiliation. I think that's important. So I think the message that we send forward is an important one. At the same time, I think people want a city of hope and opportunity. And so when we're talking about income inequality, those are real issues. When we're talking about a safe city, fewer police officers than we had 10 years ago, that's important. Infrastructure, streets, moving people from point A to point B. All of those issues are critically important.
Supposedly a nonpartisan race, but clearly there's going to be a stakeout of positions. The Republican Party, I saw Senator Betancourt at your event. He's very conservative. You're unapologetically moderate, but you still have a Republican base. What is the difference between your bases if we go into this election?
Well, look, I think that there's sort of 3 big groups. I think there's African Americans, whites that lean Republican and whites that lean Democrat. Obviously, we both had a base in this election, and I think we're going to be competing for those other bases that didn't have someone in. But I want to say something about the turnout in Hero, because this is very interesting. More people voted in the mayor's race than voted in the Hero election, by about 7,000 votes. And that indicates to me that I think people were coming out because they really cared about the mayor's race. I think Hero was sort of the icing on the cake for some voters, but I think you're going to see a very big turnout in the runoff.
Feeling good?
I feel excellent. I feel excited about it. I think the support that we have gathered in this campaign has been broad-based. I don't think that you can identify it based on racial dynamics, and I don't want us to go there. I want us to bear in mind that if you appeal to what's in the best interest of the city, then that should be a good message, whether you're Republican, Democrat, black, white, or brown, whether you're straight or gay.
Bill?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very, I think it's going to be an interesting runoff. You know, we've known each other for a long time. We've got some different views. I think both of us intend to focus the campaign on issues, and I think it'll be a good discussion for the city to have about its future.
Bill King, Sylvester Turner, thank you for coming in. Always good to see you. You know you can welcome to come back here anytime, anytime. Appreciate it. Good luck to both of you in the
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Coming up, Superintendent Terry Greer is here. An almost $2 billion bond passed by voters coming up a bit short. Inflation or something else? We'll try to get to the bottom of that next when Houston Newsmakers continues.
KPRC Channel 2. This is Houston Newsmakers with Cambrell Marshall.
And welcome back to Houston Newsmakers, where I'm joined by HISD Superintendent Dr. Terry Greer. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to
see
be
you
back.
again. Hey, a few weeks ago you said you're going to retire. That's going to happen next year.
Yep.
And then shortly after that, we started to talk a little bit more, at least in the media, about the bond issues.
Sure.
So back in 2012, almost $2 billion approved, and now we know it's going to be a little short. What happened with that?
We started telling the school board last January that we were coming up short. And we told them again in February, and we told them again in March, and we've been repeating this. So this is not something that all of a sudden just came up and caught people by surprise. Mm-hmm. And basically what happened is when we went out for the bond in 2012, most schools around us and around Texas were being built $165, $175 a square foot. And we added $160 a square foot in our bond because we weren't planning on building elaborate schools. We were going to build just solid schools that would last 70 to 80 years.
Right.
And we worked hard. We worked really hard to keep our promise. And in our first phase, our schools, when we first went out for bid, they came in pretty close to where we had them budgeted. And then all of a sudden, something happened. The cost of building in Houston just took off. I've never seen anything like it in my life, and it still doesn't seem to be slowing down any by the time, by the way you go out and look at the cranes. And, and so right now, building costs are coming in at about $122 a square foot versus what we have budgeted. And we budgeted $160. We put about some money in for inflation.
Well, you said, we'll go back, you said 100 and you budgeted 160.
160.
And now it's at 222. 222, okay, because you said 122. You meant 222.
222.
So much higher now, and multiplied across the board. But by your projects, that's where it comes in. Cost increases notwithstanding, there was a lot of fanfare about what would be done with that money when it first happened in 2012. And the HISD, voters approved that, and you guys came out and said, we're going to be talking about this. We're going to see that you're going to be able to see this. We're going to be very transparent. A lot of people are asking questions, including your own board president talking about that. Here's a part of a report. I've got a report, our KPRC investigator Robert Arnold, on some of the delays going on and the resulting perception.
Some of the district's biggest bond projects have fallen behind schedule. HISD was supposed to start construction by the middle to end of this year on a new $100 million Bel Air High School. Now, construction won't start until the middle or end of next year. It's a similar situation at the $80 million high school for the performing and visual arts. HISD scheduled construction to start by the end of last year, and there was a groundbreaking ceremony in December. But now, the district says construction won't start until the end of this year. We found the same type of delays on the new $55 million Fur High School.
I'm concerned that we don't have as many buildings coming out of the ground by now as we should. The taxpayers need to see, in order to have the trust in us, they need to see those buildings coming up, and they need to see that soon.
Kind of tough when you have to delay things, but when you don't have the money, that's what's going to happen. How do you make sure that that becomes apparent, that that's why the delay is happening and that there's nothing else going on?
Well, first of all, I certainly share Board President Skiller-Jones' frustration. It's very frustrating. It's a lot of different issues and not the same in each school. Bel Air is totally separate. Because at Bel Air, we're working with the city council. Mm-hmm. And at Bel Air, you can only build a 2-story building. You can't build a 3-story building. And the real issue at Bel Air is trying to get the city of Bel Air to approve what we plan to build. Right. And that has been a challenge for us. Now, HSPVA is much different. We sent that project out for bid. It came in much too high. And we rebid it. And when you rebid, and that's the problem, when you rebid, you're delaying 6 months to a year.
Right, so the delays are happening. School board has asked for, they've seen an internal audit, and some of it I understand you weren't really agreeing with it. No. What was it about the internal audit that's done by HISD, by the way? What was it about it that you didn't agree with?
Well, first of all, it was done by an internal auditor that works directly for the board, doesn't work for the staff, which is okay. But basically, it was saying that, the real issue here is, if you read it, is that we weren't getting enough bids and that we weren't following the right bidding process. Now, Canberra, when I came to work here in '09, we had a 2007 bond that was in disarray. It was a mess. We came in, we cleaned that up, we built those schools on time, we built quality schools, and we had enough money left over to build a new elementary school in the Bel Air community. We're using the same bid procedures today that we used then. Then we were getting 6, 7, 8 bids on a project. Today we're getting 2 or 3 bids on a project. Then those projects were coming in at or under budget. Now the projects are coming in $200, $222, $223 a square foot. Now, Dallas just passed a bond yesterday, or this past week, to rebuild their high schools. They budgeted $250 a square foot for their project. If you look at what's going on around us in Cy-Fair and other school districts right in Harris County, the bids are coming in at $222 to $225 a square foot.
We're going to talk more about that because this is an important issue. We're going to do more about that. We've got a Newsmakers extra time with you about this topic. I want you to make sure you go to that. Go to clicktohouston.com under the community banner, click on Newsmakers, and get the link to the extra. We'll talk more about this bond and also a proposed discipline policy calling for no suspensions of certain students. We'll talk about all that. Thank you, Dr. Greer. Before we finish today, some great information for veterans. More than 10,000 are said to be jobless in Houston. If you're one of those, we've got a great way to help you find a job next week. Stay with us. We should all be honoring our veterans on Veterans Day this coming week. Gulf Coast Workforce Solutions is doing so, along with the Texas Veterans Commission and the Texas Medical Center. They're honoring and sponsoring the 4th annual Hiring Red, White, and You Veterans Job Fair. It'll be at Minute Maid Park on Thursday the 12th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. There'll be 2,500 positions ready to be filled. Each of the employers there will have more than 10 positions available for the more than 10,000 veterans in the Houston area who need jobs. This is the place to be. For more information, go to worksolutions.com/HRWY to register for this free event. We love our veterans. Thank you, Sylvester Turner, Bill King, and Dr. Terry Greer for joining me this morning, and all of you for tuning in. Have a great day. I'll see you back here again next week.